was the Indian Messiah who brought the British Empire to its knees. The activist who taught the world a new way to make history. He was the visionary who called for a world without racial or religious discrimination. The martyr who in 1948, at the age of 79, fell to an assassin's bullet.
The person who has influenced my life in terms of action more than anybody is Mahatma Gandhi.
The influence of Gandhi in our politics, in our methods of political action, has been quite formidable.
Internationally, Gandhi is revered as the father of non-violent struggle, who inspired Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, and the current President of the United States. He was born in an India very different to today, a country wholly subservient to the British Empire. Gandhi's mother, herself drawn to Jainism, who first exposed her son to the idea of non-violence as the road to spiritual and social equality. He was an average student, but he admits in his own writing that he was easily distracted in his early teens. The main reason seems to have been his marriage at the age of 13. Her name was Kasturba, a neighbour's daughter from back in Porbandar. He crossed these dark waters an outcast. But against all his expectations, London would awaken in the young Gandhi a spiritual spark that his own country could not. As he approached Tilbury Docks, there were no regrets, only ambition.
On the boat, I had thought that white clothes would suit me better when I stepped ashore, and therefore I did so, in white flannel. My young mind tried to unify the teachings of the Gita and the Sermon on the Mount. That renunciation was the highest form of religion appealed to me greatly.
After his 3 years in London, Gandhi is called to the bar. The young man from Porbandar is a gentleman barrister. And yet he's so much more. He's also an idealist who begins to glimpse his destiny as a force for good. So when an offer came from a law firm in South Africa, a position little above that of a clerk, he had no option. He had to take it. And that decision changed the course of his life.
In 1893, a young Indian lawyer arrived in Durban and set up his first legal practice. Over the next 20 years, this young man would change drastically from a middle-class lawyer to an extraordinary political leader. His name was Gandhi.
Gandhi got to know about indentured labourers very soon after arriving here. His first major contact with an indentured worker was in 1894. The man was beaten by his employer and had his front 2 teeth smashed, and the man was in terrible distress and came into Gandhi's legal offices.
This encounter would mark a turning point in the young lawyer's life. Gandhi began his campaign against indentured labour by exposing the plight of the Indians at public meetings. But he quickly realised that the future lay in unifying the isolated Indian community. The result was the first Indian newspaper in Africa.
Indian Opinion begins to chronicle the conditions that indentured workers lived under and the poor housing conditions, the poor food that they had, the treatment by employers. It is a rich chronicle of grievances.
Gandhi's newspaper exposed the realities of indentured labour worldwide, but the written word was not his only weapon.
It was meant that this paper would reach British India, it would reach authorities in England, that it changed to become a paper of mobilizing people. It begins to take a very important role in motivating people to go to jail. So it becomes a paper which says jail is an honorable place to be when the laws are unjust.
The method Gandhi pioneered to end indentured labour became known as passive resistance, a sustained campaign of non-violent protest based on the principle of civil disobedience. In November 1913, Gandhi launched his biggest campaign to date. He began by addressing Natal's coal miners, persuading the indentured workers to come out in protest against the government. Soon, over 15,000 indentured workers from the nearby sugar estates also joined the strike. 20,000 people responded to Gandhi's call. These are the only surviving photographs of that protest in 1913 and show Gandhi himself at the moment of his arrest. They also capture the birth of civil disobedience. Many of the protesters were brutally beaten and imprisoned by British officers, and Gandhi was sentenced to 9 months in prison.
As he sat in his first-class carriage soaking up the spectacular landscapes, he must have thought he'd finally arrived. How wrong he was. People in his carriage began to stare and then complain to the train staff. Gandhi produced a valid first-class ticket and made loud protestations. It was to no avail. He was asked to move into a third-class carriage, and when he refused, he was forcibly thrown off the train.
I began to think of my duty. Should I fight for my rights or go back to India? Or should I go on to Pretoria without minding the insults and return to India after finishing the case? I should try, if possible, to root out the disease of color prejudice and suffer hardships in the process.
Gandhi had found a cause that stirred up those boyhood beliefs in truth and equality, a cause to which he could dedicate his knowledge of religion and the law, a cause that was to occupy him for the next 21 years. Fatima Mir is a renowned anti-apartheid activist whose life's work has been the fight against injustice and oppression. She's written extensively about Gandhi's life in South Africa.
I think in himself, he was born with a sense of inner divinity. He was too humble all his life to ever think of himself as divine. But the central content of the human was the soul, and the soul was divine. He came to that realization, particularly at the Maritzburg station when he was kicked off the train. And when he sat there in that cold night, thinking, Gandhi was never simply a political being. The fight had to be divine. It had to be moral.
He was still only 25 years old, but in a matter of months, Gandhi had attached 9,000 names to a petition and organized the Indian community into a substantial political force, the Indian Natal Congress. It was an extraordinary feat which sent shivers of alarm through the white population. Gandhi now had his place in the history books, having founded the first ever political organization against colonialism. Gandhi decided to create his own community. Here at Phoenix, just outside Durban, he could live a devout life dedicated to God. Today, the preserved buildings are surrounded by a sprawling township, but then it was in the middle of nowhere, a sanctuary of peace and tranquility.
Mandela, on his first trip to India, he said to the Indian officials that you gave us Gandhi and we gave you a Mahatma. And I think that was the creating of a Mahatma was in South Africa.
In 1913, Gandhi announced the resumption of Satyagraha, a strike against a punitive tax. The timid boy from Porbandar was on the threshold of realizing his destiny. When Gandhi returned to Durban, he was treated as a hero, but his mind was already elsewhere. He had accepted and fulfilled his destiny on South African soil. Now India was calling him home. On July the 18th, 1914, he set sail, secure in the knowledge, as he told his supporters, that a new force had arisen in the world, the force of truth.